Hi, I'm Dr. Ranj Singh. I'm an NHS doctor and TV presenter, and I'm just about coping. What you are and what you can cope with is in many ways not determined by you most of the time. It is down to how, what you were born with, how you were brought up, and what you were taught in terms of how to cope.
I'm Simon Blake, and this is Just About Coping. This is our third episode, and my guest today is none other than TV's Dr. Ranj Singh. Dr. Ranj is an NHS doctor, a TV presenter, and now Sunday Times best-selling author of Save Money, Lose Weight. You might of course recognise Ranj from This Morning, or of course from his time on Strictly Come Dancing. As a practising clinician, a wise man with enormous emotional intelligence, it won't surprise you to know that Dr. Ranj had an enormous amount to say about mental health. I enjoyed our conversation enormously, and I hope you do too. Okay, so thank you, Ranj, for joining us for this podcast. Great to have a guest, NHS doctor, TV presenter, renowned for having a massive smile on your face at all times, and here to talk about well-being and mental health. I'd just be really interested, to start off, mental health, well-being, as a doctor, as a TV presenter, as a well-known person, as a person who likes to be happy. What does it mean to you?
Oh, what does it mean to me? Wow. Obviously, I've got a professional interest in mental well-being. I look after children, young people, and secondarily their families in the NHS, and mental health plays a huge part in what we do. And actually, increasingly, I think just as a society, we're all much more interested in mental health than we used to be, which is a good thing. And also, personally, I've had my own challenges. I've had my own struggles. My family and friends have. So you cannot get away from it. It is something that you're going to have to think about at the very least. And I like to think that I'm very privileged and lucky doing the jobs that I do. If I can somehow use those to further the conversation or even make things better for people, then I should at least do that.
And clearly you are already doing that. We've seen you making videos talking about mental health.
Yeah.
And as you say, we can't get away from it. We don't want to get away from it.
No.
We want the conversation to change. And in your experience, how easy do you think that change is going to be? We're in a place now where people are starting to talk about it, but how far away are we from really being a society that is going to grasp it, understand it, and be mentally literate?
I don't know is the answer to that. Obviously, things have moved a very long way very quickly, I think, relatively speaking. Traditionally, when the only time people would talk about mental health issues was when they hit a crisis point. So you'd either be fine or not fine. And that was it. And now we've recognised, and I think part of it is because we are much more communicative as a society, and social media plays a huge part in that. But also because I think our lives are generally harder, more difficult in many ways for many people. I think people have found that actually there's a lot more in between that happens, and mental health is something that is a part of your life. It's just like your physical health is something you need to look after. The tricky thing is, I think at the moment, is we're trying to work out how to do that.
Yep.
Lots of people are trying various different things. What's available to people who are in trouble and are struggling changes, and sadly in many cases is getting less and less. And that means that the rest of us, the other side of it, where we prevent people getting to that point, we have to work a bit harder. Quite how we do that, I'm not sure. Obviously, we do, myself included, done a lot around raising mental health awareness. That was the first step, really. And that was talking about it on public platforms. That's really important. That's great. We've done a huge amount of that. The problem is now that we're really seriously facing is, what do we do now that we've identified there's an issue? Like, what do we do for the people who are speaking up because they can't get the help that they need? A recent report, I think, not too long ago, looked at children and young people's mental health and their ability to access the treatment they need. And there was something like, in the UK, every year about 110,000 children and young people who who can't get the treatment they need. And that could either because it doesn't exist, or they don't meet the treatment threshold, or for whatever other reason they can't get it, funding being a big issue. That's the challenge we're facing now. And I think my personal stance from the work that I've done in the public eye around awareness has actually shifted. My stance is now very much towards, right, what can we actually do? What can we give people as tools to either improve or build or maintain their mental health? What can we do for people who are in trouble in terms of getting them the support and help that they need? That's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, and I think the lack of resources is clearly a big issue, and the NHS long-term plan hopefully will address some of that, and there will never be enough money, I think, is what we can conclude on. You and I have both worked in sexual health at different points. The same arguments around sexual health services. That doesn't mean to say they're not any more or any less acute.
Yeah, exactly.
But if we think about our well-being, and you've just written a book about food and about well-being. Last year or the year before on Strictly, with the highs and lows of that. How do you think we can approach our own well-being? What is the relationship between ourselves, what we eat, what we do, our hobbies, our experiences, and how what's your take on that?
So the key to mental health is not the same for everybody. There is no one size fits all. It is unique to you, and it is down to you to kind of work out what does and doesn't work for you. Lots of things will have an impact on any individual person's mental health. The biophysical social, as we call it. So it could be their genetic biological makeup and what they're born with, their physical health, their immediate environment, their employment, their social circles, what's going on socio-politically around them. All these things will impact on your mental health. And first of all, it's important to I suppose, appreciate that a lot of what happens, a lot of how you feel, isn't necessarily your fault.
Sure.
What you are and what you can cope with is in many ways not determined by you most of the time. It is down to how, what you were born with, how you were brought up, and what you were taught in terms of how to cope. So much of how we feel is the product of what's going on around us. But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't do something about it. So I recently heard this jam jar analogy. Someone described it as, it was only yesterday in a meeting. They said, if you think of yourself as a jam jar, the size of the jar is your ability to cope. That's your resilience, if you want to call it that. That's your capacity to deal with your pressures. The amount of jam that's in the jar are all the issues that you're having. Now, they said that you may not be able to change the amount of jam that's in there, but you can potentially change the size of the jar. I think that's only part of the solution, actually. You can change the jam that's going in there. You can change the pressures that are on you to an extent. You can change the environment and its impact on you, but you can also improve your own resilience as well. There is a big movement, particularly in the NHS right now, to improve doctors' resilience, let's say. And it's become, sadly, I think, a bit of a buzzword, because doctors, I think, are generally quite resilient already. And if doctors are breaking down, it's because the system needs to change, not necessarily that doctors need to get better at coping. And the same applies to so many people in other industries. A lot of people are inherently resilient. They are good at it. They may not be amazing. No one is. No one's perfect. But that shouldn't be used as an excuse to not change the systems around us, to not change the world around us, and the way, the toxic influences that we have, for want of a better word, the negative influences that we have around us. We should be able to at least try and make the environment around us a bit better as well.
Yeah, and certainly, there is no point having a well-being program at work if actually the fundamentals are the job isn't doable, or the stresses are not
and that's it.
manageable.
And often I think these programs are introduced as plasters, as a tick box. Potentially, we're doing something, or actually, we can't change the bigger things, so let's do something simple and small and say we've done something. That's just not going to work. It's going to be a waste of time and money. What you have to do is have a whole systems approach and think about it And that's what we need to start doing as a society, actually, because, people talk about a mental health crisis. You could call it that, actually. I think it's probably always been there. It's just we're just recognising it a bit more and more, and sure, pressures are changing.
Yeah.
And if we're going to deal with it, then we need to look at several aspects of it, not just one thing.
I 100% agree, and I think that we always, the jam jar analogy, we have a stress container analogy, and that sort of bit about the release tap. What is it that you may not always be able to deal with everything which is in that, but there will be some things which you might be able to do, and some of those things that you might do may be good for you, and some of them may be damaging. We use a lot of alcohol to self-medicate often, but if you were to think about your own journey, what have been the things which you have done in order to be able to manage stresses, difficult times, the ups and downs of life, either sort of practical tips or advice that you've had?
Gosh, that's a tricky one. At different stages of my life, obviously I've had different challenges and actually different ways of coping with it. So when I was very young, I remember being quite not angsty as a teenager, but going through a tough time as a teenager, and having some very, very negative thoughts. And I didn't have anybody to talk to at that time. I almost had to be my own counsellor, in a way. And that's, I think, quite sad. And I'm hoping that situation has changed for young people today. And then,
sadly, not for all.
Sadly, not for everyone. That's the thing. We're working towards a place, I hope, where every young person in need gets support. I know it's a big challenge. Through adulthood, I've got a very stressful job within the NHS. I've had issues with or difficulties around relationships and sexuality, which has posed challenges. And I suppose the way I've coped with it is, firstly, accepting that it's happening, owning that it's yours. Then talking to people around me, be they friends, family or professionals. I've been very lucky to have people around me that have been hugely supportive. And accepting help. The biggest challenge, I think, if anyone's going through anything difficult, is to speak up and say, I'm failing, because that's what it feels like. Especially as doctors, we're trained not to say or think that. Mm-hmm. Because how could you possibly, you're there to be helping everybody else, how could you possibly be the one in need? Acknowledge it, be honest, be open, speak to somebody. And I found personally counselling really, really helpful. So I've had a couple of counsellors through various stages in my life, and they've just helped me work through things. And I think everybody should have a counsellor personally. It's just, it's an emotional vent. It's an emotional pop-off valve where you can just go somewhere and for 30, 45 minutes, just let off that steam that's been building up. And it's so therapeutic. Sadly not available to everybody, and it's not the cheapest thing in the world, I acknowledge that. But for me, it was really, really useful. And then I found more recently adapting certain parts of my life. Learning to say no was a big thing. We're brought up, I think we live in a culture where if somebody asks you to do something, you've got to take it on, particularly in my job, because otherwise it's seen that you can't. Yeah. So learning to be selective, saying either no or not yet, that's the big lesson I learned at work. Learning that you can't just do everything. You have to prioritize things, and there's only so much capacity you have, and you have to save some of that for yourself. So you have to look after yourself. And I found that, so being a doctor, we always talk about exercise. Go and do some exercise. Great. Exercise is boring as hell. I hate going to the gym. I hate running. But I found through Strictly a form of exercise that I absolutely adore. And I fell in love with dancing, and it's something that I've carried on. And I've never felt better for it. That's become one of my ways of coping with the stresses and strains of everyday life.
I want to come back to the dancing in a minute, but I also don't want to move too far away from the word you used, which was to accept that you're failing.
Yeah.
It feels like a really interesting
Yeah.
word. And actually, when there's so much stigma around
absolutely.
well-being and
Yeah.
around mental health,
Because it's seen as failure.
the very thing that it isn't is failing, isn't it? So just be keen. Talk to me a bit more about, say, accepting you're failing, because in a positive, some of the best things decisions I've ever made, and when I knew that I was never going to be successful at something, right, it's time to do something else. But talk to me a bit more about accepting you're failing.
If you were to develop cancer tomorrow, you wouldn't beat yourself up and say it was my biological failure. Mm-hmm. Therefore, in the same vein, if you develop a mental health difficulty, we beat ourselves up, actually, but we shouldn't. It's a similar principle. You know what? If something doesn't work, it's okay. If you're not perfect at something, it's okay. If some part of your life lets you down, it's okay. It's all very much part of a human experience, I think. Life is not like the movies. Love is not like the movies. And I sadly think that often we feel like it should be. Yeah. And at work, relationships, love, all of that kind of stuff, we feel like we should be the most successful, most happy, most affectionate, having sex 24 hours a day type people. That's not real life. And accepting that the idea that you have of what you should be actually may be wrong. And that doesn't mean you failed at it, but it's almost accepting that it's okay to, if you do.
So that, and I think that's that bit, isn't it? That actually, particularly as boys, you learn very quickly that you're supposed to be, being a real man is not being gay, not being a girl, not asking for help, not crying. And actually, if we're going to really sort this out, then the thing we have to do is reward and recognise that asking for help is a good thing.
It's a good thing.
It's really, really important.
It's a big positive step, and it's something that I've had to learn. Even professionally, one of the things I see this in myself. I struggle to ask for help, and I have to tell myself, no, this is the right thing to do, because that's what you're supposed to do. And the same should apply in the rest of our lives. Yeah.
But it's not always easy, is it? The should often also become the enemy of the might and the could. And obviously you talked earlier about some challenges around relationships and sexuality, and some of that was also bound up with what other people thought that should be expected of you. So I guess just be interested to that moment where you think, actually what other people want for me isn't what I want for myself, and the courage that is required for that.
It took me 30 years to realise that, or truly appreciate that what other people thought was best for me wasn't actually best for me. I was the person that could decide that, because they weren't living my life 24/7. They weren't experiencing what I was going through, doing what I was doing. And I tend to be, I'm the type of person, I'm a people pleaser. So it's all about everybody else. And it's only when I turn the focus in on myself, I thought, hang on a second, hang on a minute. But you're not happy. And you're the most important person here. And that's not a selfish thing. You are the most important person in your life. But obviously that's not the be all and end all of your life. And it's realizing that what people think of you or think is best for you isn't necessarily the case, isn't necessarily what you should be worrying about. And it was only when I made that realization that I thought, I'm going to actively try to do me. And that's when I became the happiest I have ever been, I think. It was liberating in a way. Scary as hell, because you're kind of like, don't know what the hell it is I want. How do I gauge myself? How do I validate myself? Because we all validate ourselves on the opinions of others. But it's actually the best thing in the world. Like, be your own best self. Who cares what anybody else thinks?
Yep. And talking of people pleasing, it would be remiss not to go back to the dancing. So when you were asked to go on Strictly, what went through your mind?
I screamed. I loved it. I have been a massive fan of the show for years and years and years. And for a long time, whenever people would ask me, oh, what's the ultimate show that you would want to do? I'd say Strictly, because it was a pipe dream, because I thought that's never going to happen. And then it did, which was kind of a bit weird and a bit sort of bamboozling in a way. But I just threw myself in and thought, I am going to make the most out of every single minute of this. And it was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Physically, I was broken. Mentally, I was close to breaking because it's such a stressful experience. You put everything into it. But at the same time, I was weirdly in love with it. It was really, and then when it finishes, you do have a sort of a slump right afterwards, because you've gone from being on high alert and running at 100 miles an hour to all of a sudden being at 0. And you have to be really, really careful and look after yourself. The entire time, I developed anxiety during my Strictly experience, and Jeanette, my partner, really helped me through that.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, with the slump that happens, it was her and various other people in my life that kind of picked me up and said, right, come on, back on your feet. I know you've you've just fallen off this cliff. Now it's time to get back up and start walking again. I don't think anyone can prepare you for... Strictly is a very specific process. It's a very specific kind of show. And no one can prepare you for how all engulfing it is. It takes over every part of your life for the time that you're there. It's the biggest show on television, so there's a little bit of a hoo-ha around it.
A little bit of a hoo-ha.
A little bit of a
What
hoo-ha.
a good description.
And at the end of the day, it's a contest. So you are in competition, not just with yourself. You're in competition with other contestants. You're competing to win the favour of the nation, of the judges, of your partner. You don't want to let your partner down. So there's a huge amount of emotional turmoil that goes into it. As much as you might love it, it is a melting pot of emotion. And then, so physically, you're training for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And you're doing that 4 or 5 days a week. As somebody who did a bit of physical activity, going to that was a massive leap for me. And my body took a while to adjust. I was in agony a lot, but you get used to it. You develop a really close bond with your partner. Your partner becomes not just your dance coach and your teacher, but your mentor, your confidant. You share this very strange bond that you wouldn't normally have with somebody you've just met. And I'm not surprised things like the so-called Strictly curse happen, because you're thrown into this very, very weird situation where you're physically and emotionally very close to someone that you barely even know. Fortunately, in my instance, I got a really, really close friend out of it. And we're still regularly in touch. We catch up quite frequently. I only saw her last week. It's great. Actually, I only saw her a few days ago. And then at the end of every week, there's this huge elephant in the room that you're going to have to perform something which you barely know and you're not really feeling comfortable with. Is so out of your comfort zone in front of millions and millions and millions of people and be judged for it. And you do that on a week by week basis. It is intense. It's really intense. And if you don't know how to look after yourself, if you don't have some form of coping mechanism, then you are really going to struggle. And I think different people struggle to different extents. It taught me a lot. It taught me a hell of a lot. Not just physically, it's got me into dancing and developed my love of that, but mentally it's taught me how to cope with a lot of stuff. I talk a lot about how to cope with anxiety with my patients. I never really had to do it myself until Strictly happened, because then I was going through exactly what they were experiencing. And part of me learning how to deal with it was my partner. She knew exactly what to say when, which is it's really helpful to have somebody there that can do that, but not everybody does.
And I think you will have seen there's been a number of reality TV shows where questionable whether doing enough to support the well-being and mental health of their contestants. And I guess just listening to you, it feels like, you know, we all now know what these live TV shows require, and there certainly feels like a responsibility for them to help people through those processes, both at choice, during and after.
I agree. I absolutely agree with that. I think that we have to accept that these shows do have impacts on people. And actually, the difference between Strictly is that it's the contestants are people who are used to being in the public eye and in the media, whereas on certain other shows, they may not have had any experience of that. So that adds an entirely different level of complexity. But we are now at a time where I think we're beginning to appreciate that TV isn't just TV. It's not just entertainment. It has a bigger impact on people than we may appreciate. And therefore, we have to put in place mechanisms and strategies to support people when they need it. Yeah. And people are coming round to that, which is good, which is really, really good. I hope to see it develop more and more, though.
And if you also you talked earlier about social media, and to just be interested from the conversations you're having with children, young people and their parents, where you are. And I'll put my cards on the table here. I think that we overplay sometimes the impact of social media, but I don't want to underestimate the impact of it at the same time. But we'd just be keen, if you had, when is it good for well-being, and what do we need to watch out for?
I think we have to be really careful that media screen time, as we call it, often gets demonized very quickly. And actually the scientific evidence behind that isn't great. There is something to say that if you're spending a lot of time sitting in front of a screen, you're not out and about being active, you're not engaging socially with other people face to face. There is something to be said about that. But I don't think the headlines and the negative press it gets actually befits what it actually does. And we mustn't forget that actually social media can be a huge source of support for people. Connectivity with other people, connection with others is hugely protective mentally as well. And some people are isolated. Some people don't have the opportunity to get out and about, or they can't relate to the people immediately around them. And for them, social media is actually a lifeline. Yeah. We mustn't forget that there are huge amounts of organisations doing really positive things on platforms like social media. And we've worked with some of them, and we've seen the impact it can have in a good way. Yeah. But it's a double-edged sword. Like, people used to demonise TV, and they still demonise TV. They say, oh, you can't watch too much TV, blah, 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 blah. Your eyes will go square and all sorts, and you'll go blind. I remember people saying if you sit too close to the TV...
That's masturbating, not watching TV, Ranj.
Depends what you're watching on TV, Simon. But the same gets... The social media gets the same rep. Actually, there are good points and bad points, and what we have to do is teach people how to use it appropriately. So teach people how to use screen time and social media appropriately. How to, when to put it down, when it's a good thing, when you need to step away, when you need to actually go and do other things with your life. And my gauge is, if it's affecting other parts of your life, then you're probably doing it too much. Yep. And that applies for anything, masturbation included.
Okay, so just for the point of clarity, masturbation does not make you go blind.
No, it doesn't.
Because we can't reinforce that myth.
No.
After 21 years of working in sexual health. So talking of balance, I guess one of the things which we have a real responsibility for is to learn and to help children, young people to learn. And I know that the health and well-being of children, young people is a particular passion and interest of yours. If you were to sort of look forward 15, 20, maybe even 30 years, if we can go that far.
I don't think I'd be alive then, Simon.
I hope you will. I hope you will. What would you hope we'd have learned? What do you hope society will look like for children and young people?
What I'd really like to see is a bit more of a shift towards and I'm not just talking medically here, I'm talking more socio-economically, socially, to preventative strategies. So shifting the focus from being reactive to being proactive. Early intervention being the classic example. So a lot of people, early intervention basically means putting systems and structures in place and services from an early age so that problems don't develop later. We know that 50% of mental health issues develop by the age of 14, let's say. That's the statistic that gets thrown around quite a lot. And yet most of the services that deal with mental health problems and issues actually target much older age groups and later on in life, and they consequently are going to be more reactive, and it's harder to deal with stuff and manage it at that stage once you've hit that crisis point or that breaking point. And what we need to do is use this mentality of spending a penny to save a pound. That's what we need to be doing, early intervention. There is a move towards doing a bit more of that, but the difficulty is, and this is a bit more of a political argument actually, is that it doesn't give you immediate results. So you can't say to your voters or your financiers or commissioners, look, we've done this and it's done this. There we go. There's the proof. So let's do more of it. It doesn't work like that. These are things that actually are much, much more longer term. And with governments changing every few years or possibly even sooner than that, it's much harder to justify and show something like that. I'd like to see us investing and actually seriously investing in the health and well-being of young people, because I think later on, and it will take 60, 70, whatever years to find out, but later on I think we're going to be in a much, much better place.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, isn't it, how short-termist we become. If you look about 50 years ago, there were 500,000 physical health and safety accidents in the workplace. After 50 years of action, it's now at about 70,000. The people in 1970 were probably not wanting results by 1971.
Exactly.
But we have to have that long-term.
You have to have that vision, and it'd be nice to have a government that has that vision.
Clearly, you're not making any comments at all. We often talk about the things that cost money. And one of the things which, again, we both share a passion around is equality, and human rights. And clearly, there are support mechanisms that need to be in place. But just really interested to get your sense. You talked before about homophobia, biphobia. We've talked about racism. What can we do without any money to ensure that people feel welcome, they feel included, they feel as though they're good enough?
Teach people to be kind. That's what it is. It's simple, basic human kindness. Kindness for me is one of my mantras, actually, always be kind. And it doesn't necessarily mean just being nice to people or being lovey-dovey. It's not that at all. It is a mindset. It's a kindset. Oh, that's a term I should use. Kindness is a mindset. It basically means accepting people and trying to understand them for who they are. Not just tolerating. I don't like the word tolerance because I think it's a bit short-sighted. I think it's limited. It's about understanding and accepting people around you, that they may be different, and maybe even celebrating with them, giving them a helping hand when they need it, and vice versa. It's about championing the rights of those who are less fortunate, less privileged than you. It's about being an ally as opposed to just saying you're an ally. It's about being aware that others don't share the same privilege as you. All of that that doesn't need lesson plans, that doesn't need money, that just needs an attitude change. And attitude changes don't cost anything. Putting them into place is tricky. There's a big debate about where do you start? Do you start in the home? Do you start at school? Do you start at work? Do you start online? And maybe we all just need to start everywhere, really. I'd like to think that people try to teach children to be kind from a young age. And then those lessons they will just carry with them for the rest of their lives and even amplify them and teach others, and then you'll get a snowball effect. That's what I'd like to see. But I think no matter, when it comes to equality and acceptance and inclusivity and all of those lovely words that we use, the core essence of it is kindness.
And of course, you talk about teaching children about kindness. My experience, of course, has often been it's children who can teach us a lot about kindness.
Yeah, children aren't born prejudiced. This is something that they learn. And I hear that time and time again. It's so true. Children don't discriminate within reason. Biologically, actually, we do discriminate to some extent. Not on the base. We discriminate against difference because we're fearful of it. We're programmed to be fearful of anything different because it's a survival mechanism. But we're more than that now. I think we'd like to think we've grown past our primal instincts and we're a bit more. And children are actually very open to changing their mind, to overcoming their primal instincts and being all accepting. And it's us adults that bugger that up.
On the note of kindset, adults needing to shift their mindset a little bit more. I'm going to ask you one last question before we finish. What's your favourite song to dance to?
Oh my gosh. Do you know what? Currently, it is Fireball. Fireball is the song that Jeanette and I did a salsa to. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. I danced it on the Strictly tour. I danced it on the Strictly cruises. I danced it on my 40th birthday. It is my, it encompasses everything that whole experience meant to me. That's got to be Fireball.
Thanks very much, Ranj. Brilliant. So I really enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Ranj. I hope you did too. We got so carried away with the conversation that we were having briefly mentioned save money, lose weight. We didn't actually revisit it. So do go online. Ranj's new book out now, Save Money, Lose Weight. If you enjoyed Just About Coping, please do make sure you leave us a rating. Do subscribe. I've got some more wonderful guests. And do get involved on social media using the hashtag JAC Podcast. Until next time, I'm Simon Blake, and thanks for coping with us.